All right, here we are. Welcome, everyone. Thrilled to be here hosting another webinar as the head of chapter for the New York City chapter of Products That Count. Welcome to all of you that have joined. Thrilled to have you and have you join for this fireside chat with our guest, Giff Constable. I'm really excited to have Giff join us here today as a really experienced product executive and somebody who's got some of the scars to show for it. We're going to be talking about some of Giff's stories from his time and working through a number of different business scenarios that I think are going to resonate with different folks at different levels and should provide some really interesting content. I'm going to let Giff introduce himself here momentarily. Just some background on Products That Count before we dive in there. For those who are new to our webinar series and our event series in general, we host events on a monthly basis, typically around this first week of the month. And we talk about different topics that are affecting product managers. So, sometimes it's career focus, a career trajectory focus. Sometimes it's, collaboration focus, right? Obviously, the role of product runs the gamut of a lot of different responsibilities, and we try to touch on different areas that are relevant for different people. I am the head of chapter for New York, and as in that role, I'm working on building a little bit more New York-centric community for members of the Products That Count group. And so stay tuned for some more news coming on some in-person gatherings that we're working on getting together here later this year. But in the meantime, we'll look forward to hopefully seeing you for our webinars in July and August at the very least as well. With that, Giff, let me turn it over to you. Let you introduce yourself to the audience here.
Sure, I'll keep it brief, but yeah, my name's Giff Constable. I've been in the tech and software space for 30 years to date myself. Began on the business side. I've had a colorful career. I've started my own companies. I've sold a couple. I've had a couple flame out. I led a consulting firm that was doing product innovation work instead of on the cutting edge of lean startup related stuff. We set up head offices around the world, and I, my happy place, I realized my happy place was really working with product and engineers and designers. And I sort of focused myself on the product track and led product and engineering at a firm where Dan and I overlapped called Axial, and then was chief product officer at Meetup, which is a brand and a name that has pretty global footprint, and some of you might have heard about, and was a colorful place to be at while it was under the WeWork umbrella.
Yeah, I think definitely a great way to put it. And I think we'll get into a little bit more on, some experiences there that some might characterize as colorful, which I'm looking forward to. So let's dive in. This format is going to be a fireside chat format. So for those of you who have joined us on past webinars, you've seen our speakers bring decks and kind of go through presentations. In the prep that Giff and I did for today's session, we thought it might be fun to switch up that format a little bit and have more of a free-flowing conversation. That said, we do have a little bit of structure today, so don't worry, we're not just going to go on a bunch of tangents. We're going to be talking a little bit about companies that sometimes need deep fundamental change to reach their potential, in cases where as a product manager, you're asked to be a driver of a lot of that change, given your unique role and your unique position as a collaborator with so many varied stakeholders throughout the business. I will say, as always, in our conversations, please feel free to drop questions into the chat as they come up for you. No need to hold those to the end. We'll try our best to answer them throughout the conversation today, and we will also aim to reserve some time at the end dedicated to Q&A. But let's kind of dive in here. So Giff, we talked a little bit about some of these experiences that you alluded to in your intro, and areas where you've been brought in to situations that might have appeared on the surface one way, and once you sunk your teeth into the opportunity, you uncovered some things that looked a little bit differently than the surface would have otherwise indicated. And in some of those cases, you've had experiences managing not just down across a team, but up and across to other stakeholders. Maybe you want to start there, just highlighting some of those managing experiences.
Yeah, I mean, Meetup is an interesting, pardon the light here, but Meetup is an interesting example. All companies are screwed up in their own way. I've kind of learned that over my career. So I don't think I'm throwing the company under the bus to say that when I arrived there, they had been under the WeWork umbrella. They're now independent, but they'd been under the WeWork umbrella for a number of months. And there were a lot of problems that were brewing. So there was a brand new CEO, and I'm coming in. They hadn't had a real product-centric product leader for a while. They'd had a business-centric, someone who came from the media industry, very smart business person, but hadn't come up as a product person where like the product is the product as opposed to e-commerce or media or other areas. And so one, there was a new CEO for me to work with and a new CEO at the company. Two, I realized that there were goals. There were some very clear goals, but there wasn't really strategy as to how we were going to get to those goals beyond let's get bigger and expand market share and things like that, but not so much a clear strategy from my point of view. There was no roadmap. So everyone was feeling burned by some big sort of executive pushed projects that had gone nowhere and had flamed out. So there was total PTSD on that, and everyone was working on sort of these micro optimizations that were all going to deliver small amounts of value, but had nothing to do with these huge stretch goals that WeWork had asked the company to go hit. And, if you know WeWork, it was about growth, the capital G. And then we had the product managers feeling really beat up. They'd been the bad guys for a while, sort of representing the business. You had engineering feeling like no one respected them. You had design, which often has arguments with engineering, actually pretty well aligned with engineering because they both hated the product managers. And so, yeah, this was the context with which I was landing, and there was a lot to fix, and we can go into whichever one of those problems interests you, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one that's interesting, and I think at least resonates for me is that high level direction problem, right? Because obviously a lot of this from a team collaboration standpoint, it trickles down from that PTSD that you alluded to. Yeah. So can you speak a little bit to just identifying where some of that strategy or lack thereof came into play and how you took steps to address that?
Yeah, when you first land in a company, you've got to decide how quickly or how slowly do you move. And there's no one answer to this. It's all very context specific. If you've got a complex place and it's got momentum, it's actually often really smart to take a step back, listen, learn, absorb, like wait, maybe go for a quick win here or there, but kind of don't rock the boat too quickly. This was a situation which was very different, where there was huge urgency to make big goals, and we were clearly not executing. We had great people, fabulous people, but in terms of what we were working on was so far from it, and there was no real plan there at all. As well as I say, feeling like the actual teams were really broken, the trust level within, you can't have an effective cross-functional team if the trust isn't there, right? So the first thing I felt like I needed to do was actually get a sort of strategic roadmap in place. While I was getting to know people and while I was like listening and trying to understand what was happening with the cultural stuff and the trust issues and things like that. And so, and I had to get to know the CEO. But basically what I did is I sort of said to everyone, like, hold off on, like, don't expect a lot of personnel management. I'm going to be getting to know everyone right now. But actually, we have to go fix this. We have to create sort of a roadmap that feels coherent to everyone.
Yeah.
And it's not so much about what the features are, but like what's the portfolio of work? Why are we doing this? Like, what are the priorities for us, as opposed to just doing stuff towards goals? And so I looked around for a key partner. The VP of design who reported to me had been there for a little while, and so I pulled Farah in. We actually took over a corner of our office and we turned that into this war room, and we had stuff all over the walls. And what we were doing is over the course of about 2 weeks, we pulled lots of different people from the organization into that corner and just talked about what was going on with the company. There were conversations with customers as well, but a lot of it was actually like pulling knowledge from inside the organization, executives, but not just executives, people who are on the ground, UX researchers who'd been listening to customers, people in customer support, right? Across the board, pulling people in, and sort of racing to sort of set a narrow set of principles, decision-making principles as to what were we not, what was important, what was not, like strategies about choices. Who are you? And what are you not, which people hate doing because they don't like giving up things. But we had to do, so we did that, and then we started basically road showing around, again, pulling people in, trying out our ideas. They started to solidify, road showing those ideas out, and then eventually that culminated in something that was coherent and that we presented to the company. Along the way, though, one thing I said to the CEO right off the bat was, how do you like to work? Like, I'm going to be putting this together pretty fast. So this is going to be rough and loose, but we both agree that there's a hole here that needs to be filled. We aren't working on the right things. So we got to determine why and what those things are. So I said, how do you like to be involved? Do you want to wait until it's a finished product? Do you like it really early? Do you want it written? Do you want it verbal? And so the CEO said, I like to be involved early, and I like it to be written, so I could absorb it, and then we could talk about it. And I said, perfect. I like rough draft culture too. That's how I
Yeah.
live. Um, and then that actually blew up in my face, which I could tell you that story if you're interested, or I'll pause and turn it back to you.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting angle to go in, but I think maybe what you're also kind of getting at there is kind of where I was a little bit curious is, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes here, right? And you've got this new organization that you're trying to get to know. You're trying to get to know the priorities, trying to get to know the people, trying to get to know the problems, and you're being asked to put together a roadmap, right? Obviously, a roadmap, it's not just the what, like you said, it's also the why, it's also the when. So many of those things are codependent, and you've got these different variables that you're trying to get your arms around while also trying to understand, okay, the CEO, right? He's obviously dealing with this whole constellation of problems constantly. He might not understand that you've got this discord between the product and engineering and UX teams that's slowing down their throughput. If you say, hey, I think we could do this thing, but it's going to take a few quarters, he might be like, a few quarters that should be done in 3 months, right? So curious, just as you're, and this again may have been a little bit of where you could have gone with that story about how the presentation of the CEO role or blew up in your face, but I'm curious, as you're kind of gathering this roadmap and not only thinking about the presentation format of the CEO or that works for the CEO, how are you thinking about, coming up with something that's going to be compelling and ultimately credibility building for you in one of these, early interactions that you have as an executive?
Yeah, yeah, totally. In some ways, the least important part of this whole quote unquote roadmap was the features and any sort of there was no Gantt chart. There were no initially there were no dates. That wasn't to me what we had to drive at. What we had to understand were what were our strategic goals, how are we defining ourselves, and what were our priorities. And once you've figured that out, I find the features tend to unfold pretty naturally.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have that underpinning and those sort of guardrails, then people don't know how to make good decisions, and you're flipping all over the place. As an example, Meetup is a marketplace, right? It helps people create communities and events, and sometimes it's, hey, let's go talk about product management. So Product Tank was built on Meetup. As an example, let's go learn about JavaScript, or let's go, do some swing dancing. There's lots of different kinds, or cancer recovery, lots of different kinds of communities and events. But it is a marketplace. You have people who organize communities on one side, and you have the people who would attend on the other. And marketplaces always have this struggle of, we have to love all of our children, but it's hard to love the supply side and the demand side equally. And where do you lean?
Yeah.
And you could see, if you looked at the history of Meetup's product decisions, that it was flip-flopping between the two constantly, feeling this pressure to work on the organizer side because that's where the revenue came from, but then also feeling this pressure to really focus on the members and the attendees, because that's what actually built the brand, and that's why organizers came to us, because we brought them people for their communities. And you could see that flip-flopping because there was no clarity around that. And what was an interesting thing for me was Ben Thompson had been writing at the time about aggregator theory, about marketplaces and platforms versus aggregators, and that little distinction was a very useful thing. Like, that really helped us understand, what are we and what are we not? As a marketplace, as a two-sided marketplace, are we a platform where we connect the two sides and then let them go, the way, let's say, the App Store does? Or are we more like Airbnb, where we connect the two sides, but actually we're keeping the customer? Customer kind of goes through us every time.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a controversial decision, but it is very useful and powerful to say we're one or the other. Like, once you make that decision, a lot of other stuff falls into place, right or wrong, but it falls into place. So I wanted to drive that decision. So that was a key thing that we were talking about. So some of the work was actually spotting those points of dissonance. I always like looking, when it comes to strategy, at where are teams, where are leaders being pulled in two different directions. New features versus tech debt, or it could be buy side versus sell side. But like, you see, when they're being pulled in two or more different directions, like, that's a really great sign that we need a decision-making principle there. And that's what strategy is, right? So, spotting those things and then working the problem until you have a point of view was key. Let me stop there, because there's so much to unpack about this. But I did want to make the point that actually, like, the features and the dates was the afterthought, and very little of the quote unquote roadmap that I presented was about that stuff. It was really about the why. It was about the strategic pillars that we were grounding ourselves in, and the why, and the problem space. It was more of a problem roadmap in some ways, and an opportunity roadmap, than it was a feature roadmap.
So I like that framing, and I think maybe that's a nice way to crystallize my question from before, right? So if we're focused really on, these strategic pillars, right, and a strategy that goes and tackles them, I think the implication, obviously, right, is that that's not what the business had been doing to this point. And, ostensibly, to some extent, that's why you've been brought in, right? And so this is your discovery of your mandate, and now you're in a position where you need to present this up to your boss, the CEO, and get his buy-in on that direction, not only as, your remit, right, but also as a direction of the business, ostensibly, right? Because that is what product should be doing in a product-led organization. And, that conversation is fraught with all sorts of implicit, I don't know how to frame it, but, implications on the leadership and the direction up to that point. So can you speak to, just now that you've kind of got this perspective, and, you've gone through your war room and gathered your stakeholders, you've got now your strategy, how you went about presenting that to the CEO, and maybe feedback or things that came of that?
Well, the trip up actually happened really fast. And it was interesting. It probably happened maybe even as fast as a weekend. We were moving really fast, as you could tell. Like, you wouldn't normally want to be doing a sort of strategic overhaul at quite the light speed that we were doing. But we had, 10 cross-functional product teams working on the wrong stuff. And so We needed to get ourselves rejiggered really quickly. So I really felt that pressure. And the CEO felt that pressure too, again, because there were these huge goals and we needed to go after those goals. As an aside, right, when companies hire senior, as an executive, right, they bring you in because they think you've seen the movie before that they're struggling with. And there were two things there's two reasons why they hired me were one, I had a story of innovating and sort of resetting strategy and resetting business models because their growth had stalled. They had these huge growth demands from WeWork, but the growth had actually stalled. It was still growth, but it was small. So CEO knew he needed someone who could shake that up. And the other was that because the the prod-eng design structure was broken, they needed someone who had healed a very broken product organization. So I had the two stories there. Anyway, back to this though. Um, I buy into this rough draft culture. I don't like surprises. I don't like it when you go away and then come back and here are the two pillars of here, look how brilliant I am kind of thing. So very quickly, I was starting to hone in on a few areas of like, I could smell, here's where the problems are. I could see, as I said, like I could tell that with some of the past decisions that they'd been flip-flopping between the buy side and the sell side. And I knew that was one of the areas. And so I created an outline of like, just here's some bullets about what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking in terms of what are probably our priorities. And so it was like 7 key things, and no more than that. And like, maybe 3 sentences afterwards. Just something like, here's just a little dip into where I'm at right now with the very early stages. No promises, nothing. I sent this over to the CEO probably at the end of the first week. It was Friday. And that night, late that night, I get this email back with the little draft that I'd sent over just covered in red line. Totally, absolutely redlined in very urgent tones. Where's revenue? Like, how's this connected to the business? Like, where is revenue? Where is revenue? Like everywhere, like capital letters. Where's revenue?
Yeah.
And then this is a very business oriented CEO, not a product oriented. I mean, that's why I was there, right? And I realized, like, oops, it was all connected to revenue in my mind, but I hadn't explicitly connected the dots. And so while I had said I embrace this rough draft culture, I hadn't been smart about how I did it. So I sent over these sort of strategic concepts, but I hadn't actually said why those things connected. Remember, I said the company had some pretty good business goals that it was going after. I hadn't connected the strategic elements that was missing to the business goals directly. And obviously for the CEO. So the CEO puked all over it, and I was like, oh my God. And he ended up feeling sort of guilty about the way he had written his response. All it took was a conversation between us where I explained, okay, no, let me connect the dots for you. Let me connect the dots for you. The lesson that I learned from this, though, is an interesting takeaway where it's actually taking a step back from, the obvious one, which is, did I connect the dots? The lesser obvious one was I had a business-oriented CEO, and I was coming in as a new chief product officer. And they were excited to work with me. I was excited to work with them. But every CEO, especially when they're bringing someone new, and that means that someone didn't work out, right? Everyone has been burned. And this is true all across the organization, right? You're hiring someone new and you're really optimistic and you're hopeful. They've passed all the interviews with flying colors and all this stuff, but you're probably worried about a couple things, right? There's probably something where you've been burned in the past and you're like, I really hope this person isn't that. And this was, again, a very numbers and business oriented CEO who had, I believe, had been frustrated with product leaders underneath him who were not business centric and not number centric enough. Really focused on the features and the customer, like and the process, but not the business enough. And they were, if I read between the lines, they were paranoid about that. And I walked right into that trap. Walked right into that trap. it wasn't hard to clear it up, but it was an unnecessary stumbling block. Because what I should have done is right away when I sat down, like day one, sitting down with them, tried to tease out of them. It's hard to ask it directly, but to tease out of them, what are you worried about? Where have you been burnt? Right? Let's talk about how our relationship's going to be great, but let's also talk about like where you've had rough relationships with CPOs in the past, and are there any concerns? Like you don't have to throw anyone under the bus directly, but let's talk about where you're worried. And again, it's like that's probably the kind of thing to get to where it takes 3 follow-on questions to really get the truth out of somebody.
Yeah.
But I could have done that. And what I would have saved myself an early stumble that again, wasn't hard to get past, but it was an unnecessary stumble. So that was I realized like now every time I join an organization, that's something I'm going to be pushing on. And frankly, I think that anyone coming in at any level, it's a wise thing to dig into.
Yeah, I think that's a really tremendous takeaway. And I mean, it aligns with the overall theme here, which to me is all around that almost requirements gathering, for lack of a less PME way to put it. But you're in that situation coming into a new
Yeah.
environment that is somehow broken, but you don't know exactly how, and you're just trying to gather information from all of your stakeholders. And you spoke to cases where you've done a lot of that, even going so far as to ask the CEO his preferred collaboration methods, but making sure you understand the missteps of your predecessor, or perceived or otherwise, just so that you can avoid those, I think is, especially in an executive role, a really, really good takeaway.
The partnership with the CEO makes or breaks you as the chief product officer. I mean, so does your partnership if you're not running engineering with your CTO and with the whole executive suite, but nothing's like the partnership with the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about fit. There's a lot of different kinds of chief product officers. You don't have to be one kind, and there's a lot of different kinds of CEOs out there, but you want the fit to be good.
Yeah. 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 So I think that's a good segue. So, speaking of fit, now kind of building on this meetup bit of experience, right? You've got a strategy, right? You've got a bunch of teams off running in directions that are not necessarily aligned to that strategy. And you need to drive some of that alignment. And, I think in product, people really take pride in their autonomy. And a lot of people seek out product roles because they seek out the opportunity to go and be the owner of the product, right? To drive the direction, to do the research that informs the strategy, that ultimately informs the deliverables. And I mean, I got to say, personally, I find that to be a really compelling part of product. But in conversations that we had ahead of this call, Giff, you were talking about where there are times, especially in some of these more challenging situations, where, especially as a leader, you need to be a little bit more forceful in the instruction that you're providing top down. So I'm curious if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, there are times when you have teams that are getting in their own way, talented people, but getting in their own way, just stumbling and can't get any momentum going. And it feels a bit like chaos, and potentially lack of trust. And when things are broken, even whether people are directly pointing fingers or kind of pointing fingers. And so there are times where it's actually useful to say, this is how it's going to be. This is how we're going to work. These are the motions that I want you to do. And put really tight guardrails around everything from strategic choices to actually even how you might do a sprint. And like if you feel like everyone's bogged down because they're spending way too much effort writing these laborious epics and stories, saying this is how I want you to do that. I mean, that's not a level you normally want to get to, but you might have to, right? And then, but the idea is, and you have to tell people this, the idea is we're going through a journey. We're going through a journey where we're going to align on one baseline, and we're going to get that working coherently and well. And then we can start to diverge, right? Let's take, as a little segue here, Kanban, I love Kanban. Kanban is as to be a process geek for a second. Kanban is a wonderful approach, but you have to be a pretty sophisticated and well-running team to do Kanban well. And so I've seen teams when they're not quite humming, try to jump to Kanban because it seems cool, and that's what the advanced teams are doing, and then they're stumbling all over the place. It's like you got to walk and then you can run. And so yeah, like you got to choose where you do it. But the I will say that when I created this roadmap, I actually had very little in the way of specific features in this document. I was still trying to protect the ability for the teams to sit back and think, okay, I haven't given a priority, I haven't given a goal. There are a whole bunch of things we could work on. Which are the ones that we're going to choose that make sense, that ladder up to the goal we've been given? I was still trying to protect that, but I was getting more rigid around a number of different things where I thought people were getting in each other's way. And there were, the as I mentioned, that things were broken between all three parts of the triad, so to speak. Engineering was really upset because they felt like there was a massive amount of technical debt. There was never any time to deal with it. There was such a rush and pressure from product management that it was only getting worse and worse. They were cutting short things like instrumentation. There was not a respect of how actually complex sometimes it could be to put A/B testing code in there. International, like all this stuff was getting cut short with this pressure to
Mhm.
ship. And what engineering needed was someone to just sit down and listen to them. And they needed to feel, when you come in as a new leader, everyone wants to believe that you're going to help. So you have a nice opening there. And the first thing you need to do is just listen, just really listen. And they need to believe that you're listening.
Mm.
And I sat down with the product management team and I just let them vent. It was like a retro, but I was like, just here's a bunch of stickies. Go put all the stuff that you think sucks on the wall
Yeah.
about the product, about the business, about what's happening with product management, everything. And I did a venting session with design and a venting session with engineering. And and I'm mostly listening, but I'm also making comments where it's clear to them that I actually care about their discipline. I care about their craft.
Mhm.
And that I intend to make changes that are going to fix some of these things. And then you have to follow through on that. It
Mhm.
didn't take a whole lot. A few small motions um, of saying to the product managers, like, nothing's going to ship unless instrumentation is in place. Just
Mhm.
the engineers hearing me say that very clearly to everyone was like, oh, okay, this guy's for real. That wasn't like a major thing, but there were a few very small things that I could do where all of a sudden engineering was like, oh, maybe things will get better. But it began with listening to them. The funny thing that happened with product management, there was also a misunderstanding there that of my own making. And I had more than one venting session with them. I heard all the stuff that was wrong. I was like, I agree with you all. You're all smart. These are wrong. This stuff is all broken. You see it too. It's not just me coming in telling you, you see it. And and then I could be pretty hard charging. And then I was like, all right, now we got to fix all this stuff. And so, I think I had a few meetings where I was calling out, this stuff is really broken. We got to fix this stuff. And they started to take it personally.
Mm.
They felt attacked because they had done these things, right? I didn't
Mhm.
blame them for doing it. I blamed some of the incentive structures and some of the executive decisions that were made. I didn't blame them, but they didn't know that. So they heard me calling out the very same things that they were calling out in the venting session, but they were getting defensive and they thought they were felt attacked. And I had the CEO pull me aside and said, like, your product managers hate you right now. Like, this is just, I don't know how many weeks into it, but it wasn't that many weeks in. It's like they're all really upset and they're angry and everything. And I was like, oh God, okay, I've been an idiot, right? Because I've had all this stuff in my head. I've listened, but I haven't communicated. I haven't communicated effectively. I've been communicating about what we need to do because, whoa, we got to do this yesterday, but not clearly about why I'm saying these things and how I feel about them. And again, it was a quick fix. All I had to do was just, in my next product management meeting, I said, let me be clear about something. I don't blame any of you for what's going on. right? I heard it from you. You all agree. We're all on the same page. What you're seeing from me is this urgency that you all share to fix this stuff. But we're in this together, and you're not to blame for it. But we have a lot of work to do, and we need. And I'm going to be pushing us hard to do it. And just that, like, it turned overnight. And literally to the point that, and I don't say this to like toot my own horn, it was just funny how radical it was, where the CEO came to me like 2 days later and said, "What the hell have you done? I've never seen anything change so radically." They're like, "Hey, did you know they love like what is going on?" I said, "I just had to clear up why I was saying what I was saying." And that was a good lesson for me,
Yeah.
um, about how as a leader you have to be so explicit with what's actually going on in your head, far more than you think you need to. Um, because they don't know people don't know what's going on in your head. They're going to make assumptions as to what's going on. And sometimes those will be inappropriately negative ones that they'll be feeling defensive. And so you got to get ahead of that. Just like with strategy, you have to repeat it ad nauseum until you're sick of saying it. You got to just repeat, repeat, repeat. It's the same thing. Like you need to listen really carefully, but you also have to put a lot of effort into explicitly talking about why, what's going on in your head and why you're being the way you're being, so that they can go on the journey with you, as opposed to guess why you're being so intense at this moment, or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal point and takeaway here for the group. And obviously that's important at any time, but of a special criticality in these moments of intense change where people know, look, we're changing because we're going to stop doing things we had been doing because they weren't working. And that by
As an example, Dan, a quick one. Um, I had a VP of product, VP of product reporting to me. Now, most of the product managers were reporting to that person because I had a lot of people. I just couldn't have the PMs reporting directly to me. I had a lot of people rolling up to me. And unbeknownst to me, when I joined, they had already been interviewing and they accepted that job like right after I joined.
Hmm.
And so I had no one for, what was it, like 10 product managers to report to. And I said, okay, you're all reporting to me. Um, Let me be clear, this is going to suck. I am not going to be able to good manager for you with all the other stuff going on. So let's acknowledge that. Let's just agree that's going to happen. You're not going to get the kind of management and one-on-ones that you want, that I want, that we both think are right. Because like we've got all these fire drills we got to get through. So work with me. Let's do this together. Like I learned my lesson where I was like, let me call out the difficult. Let me not pretend that everything's awesome. Let me call out the difficult stuff. Let's just be transparent about it. It's the elephant in the room. Let's just talk about it. And then all of a sudden, instead of people going, "Oh God, Giff's being a crappy manager for me," they were like, "Oh, okay, right. We're in this together until we manage to get the next VP in." Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And the through line of embracing the humanity of these sorts of situations and addressing that head on and keeping it front and center, and
Yeah.
everything that you're doing, managing up to a CEO, managing down to your direct reports who are obviously aware that a lot is going to be new, and that's because things haven't been going great, but that only heightens their anxiety and need for communication. Really, really interesting and practical takeaways. Um, while we've got some time here, I do want to touch on cases where
Mm.
sometimes it's more about the business, right? And obviously, there are people in their process and there are strategic things that need to be addressed in some cases, and in other cases, all of that would just be lipstick on a pig. And there are kind of fundamental issues with the way the business is organized and collecting money and just sort of structural business model challenges that would get in the way no matter what you try to do. I know you've been through a couple of examples of that. We share one. Maybe I'll let you pick it up from there.
Yes, I've seen it. As product people, like everyone in the audience here, you're product people, you know that incentive systems drive everything, and good or bad behavior. And the choice of how a company decides to make money drives huge amounts of behavior, not just within the company and the priorities that the company makes, but also in terms of your customers' actions and what they're doing and what's happening. Dan and I were at a B2B marketplace, and I'm not sure exactly, if the context is useful. This was a marketplace for small and medium-sized businesses that were looking to raise capital or sell. So on one side, you had investors and private equity firms and corporate buyers. On the other side, you had tons of bankers, entrepreneurs, and business brokers. And the way when the company started, they were like, oh, we like predictable revenue. We think we're more like a SaaS model. Let's have subscription and all this stuff. And then you look at that, and then you looked at the people's behavior and some of the weird things that were happening in the marketplace and the weird conclusions that people were coming up with. Like, we had both the buy side and the sell side saying that the other side of the marketplace sucked. The buyers were like, "There's no good deals here. All the companies that are either for sale or looking to raise capital, they suck." And the same thing was happening on the sell side. They were like, "There's no good buyers or no good investors for what I'm looking for." Now, there were two things that were wrong with it. There was a feature problem there where we didn't have a good enough matchmaking engine. We had to fix that. But it was also the revenue model. The revenue model was leading to these behaviors where, in this specific example, right, when you're an investor, you like kicking as many tires as you possibly can. You want to see all the deals, but you're only going to make a couple. And so, and what the customer success team of the company had learned is that the more deals they got, the happier they seemed to be. So the whole company was built around get them more deals, get them more deals, get them more deals. But it was not get them better deals. And so, and the subscription model sort of led to this all you can eat. That wasn't quite all you can eat, but almost all you can eat kind of thing, where they were fed into that as well. And that was leading to this, both sides thinking the other side was crap. And so what we did is, one, we had to identify it. It's as I say, when you look at the problems within a company, why is growth stalled, or like why are our customers unhappy? One of the things you have to look at is the way we're making money causing this? There could be many, many reasons why, but you do want to look at it. And it's hard to change revenue model. But I have seen more than once it actually being, companies fall into a revenue model because it seems to be the way everyone charges money. And they don't try to innovate on it. And sometimes that's the right thing to do, but then they end up in this trap, and it starts causing problems for them. So you need to look at it. It's one of the tools, and product people are really good at looking at this stuff because we think about systems, and we're at the intersection of product and numbers, which is what this stuff is. And so anyway, we changed both the matching engine, but we also experimented with putting a different revenue model in place, which incented our buyers to tighten up what they were looking for. And so all of a sudden they were getting far fewer deals, and it wasn't about let's get them as many deals as possible, but get them better, get them higher quality deals. And like literally overnight, it wasn't overnight because we went through a very painful month after we shipped some new features, and that's a whole other story about the technical debt drama and getting out a major replatform, which I never want to do again in my life, a major replatforming. But once we were through that pain, almost immediately, and we could change the revenue model and the matching engine almost immediately. The same people who were saying your marketplace sucks were saying, "Oh, this is really good." Like, where'd you get all these? Like, why is it good now? It's the same people on the product. It's just we changed the incentive structures, and we changed some of the way the product matching worked. But you couldn't just change the matching. You had to also change the revenue system as well. Now, the company went through 2 iterations. It went on a bit of a journey, finding the right revenue model. And it was actually not my idea. It was the CEO's idea for what the true revenue model should be that worked out best. But the bad revenue model was killing it. It had capped its growth and was actually starting to slide backwards. And finding its way to a new revenue model really unlocked saved the business and sort of unlocked it.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting lesson just in being open to kind of flipping all rocks, right? I think you
Yeah.
could come into a situation and say, look, it's just too much to try to tackle that. Let me go address these other problems, or hey, I don't want to make so many enemies when I walk in here, so I'm going to leave some things where they're at, and we'll tackle what's more squarely within the remit. But
Yeah.
being willing to interrogate assumptions that others might hold, especially when you're early in your tenure and you can come in as, hey, I'm just the new person, don't blame me. And get into some of those root problem analyses is really compelling.
You have
Um,
to. Chief product officer owns the entire business. You don't just own product. It's a difficult role because you're not the CEO. You don't get to make the final calls. But honestly, you're responsible for the whole damn thing. You're responsible for the system. So what's happening in sales, you're responsible for. What's happening in customer success, you're responsible. You don't manage those people, but you're still responsible for it. Like how the system works. Do you have a viable, effective flywheel of a system of how customers come in, like the product, stay, continue paying? Like you're responsible for that system, not just the features, the whole system. And so you don't begin that in product management. You begin with at the feature level, but then you become more outcome oriented and outcome focused, and you as you become more sophisticated. But that's where you are as the chief product officer. Is you have to pay attention to the entire system. You just don't get to control the whole system. You have to manage through influence to make it happen. But if you're not paying attention to the whole system, you're not doing your job, if you ask me.
I think that's a really good place to open the floor up to questions. So please feel free to drop anything on your mind here in the chat. While folks are thinking about this, I've got a question for you, Giff. And I would imagine I, like others here in the chat, thinking about, okay, so these are some good lessons learned. I'd love to not learn them myself. I'd love to just avoid joining a company with these kinds of problems. What are some questions that you would suggest product leaders ask the CEO, other execs at companies they're interviewing with, to try to suss out where there might be underlying issues before making the choice to jump on board?
Right, right. Well, other than startups, every company likes to believe they have product market fit, but the reality is they don't all. And it's ephemeral. You may have it in one market and you might lose it, or you might have it in one market, but you don't have it as you're trying to grow your market. And but no one likes to acknowledge that. The reality of it is you might have an interview with the CEO where things get really frank, but you have to remember the CEO's in sales mode. They're selling you, right? If they like you, they want to win you over. You're often not going to get and again, every company's screwed up, but you're probably not going to hear it from the investor board member that you've interviewed with and the CEO, but you can detect it if you talk to the head of customer success or support. And you're like, tell me what's going on. Tell me the challenges that you're facing, and how does that interface with product, and what are the aspirations you would have if a new product leader are coming in, and sort of get them talking. And you'll get more dirt there. It may not be the direct, but you can start to connect the dots there. And like oftentimes, I'm going to make a gross generalization, but that head of customer success or support, head of engineering, they'll tend to be a little blunter. The head of marketing or sales or the CEO, they're used to spin, so you will get a little more spin. But you could still, it's the beginning of my career, I actually did some sales. I began on the business side, and then I flipped to the product side, and so it's fairly easy for me to build an affinity with the head of sales. And so getting them talking about what's happening in sales. As a product leader, you always want your head of sales to believe that you care about them making lots of money. That's their scorecard. That's what they want. So you need them to believe that you want them to make a lot of money. But ask questions along those lines where you're trying to make that impression, but you're also trying to figure out where are they getting blocked, and how are they hoping that a better product leader or a new product leader is going to unblock them. You can really start to paint the picture. And that's even without talking to some customers or doing, your own direct research of people outside the company. So yeah, you often have to, it's sleuth work, right? You're asking these indirect questions that are painting a story as to, what kind of retention do they really have, and why, and where are the struggles versus where is it easy?
Yeah, I like that, and you actually preempted another question that I had just around specific executives in different departments to reach out to. So I love the tip to go to CS and support. Those are a couple of my
Yeah.
personal best friends at Intel.
The CFO becomes a fascinating person to get to know and have as a really close friend as a CPO once you're inside, but it's very difficult to get a CFO, a chief financial officer, to open up to you before you're inside, before you're in the inner walls.
Yeah.
It's once you're in the inner walls that all of a sudden you can get really real and dig in, and that is a relationship that's really important that I think is often overlooked or underutilized by heads of product.
Yeah, notoriously cagey, but that resonates quite a bit. Um, I have another question, just thinking about, you know, getting ahead of some of these issues. Obviously, in some of the cases that you have talked about today, you were brought in large part to address issues that were known and that folks knew needed attention. But we all might be in environments where things are bubbling up under the surface, and we would prefer to avoid a situation where an outsider has to come in and clean up our mess. Are there any leading indicators that you prefer to keep an eye on to get ahead of either a business model issue or a team issue, or if you have different indicators for either category, that would be great.
Oh, that's an interesting question. It's true that the place where you and I overlapped, they thought everything was hunky-dory. They certainly painted that story. They just raised Series C. They were trying to unlock growth, and they thought, okay, we're actually a great CEO, we've got a great market. We need to sort of ramp up how we're doing on the sales and marketing side, and we need someone to come in and lead product, which they hadn't had before. It was like, if we just get the right people in those seats, it's all going to be better.
Mhm.
And so, and the same thing and if we get in the head of engineering. So they filled those executive seats, and lo and behold, that didn't solve the problem because there were much deeper underlying problems, which I could spot fairly early once I got inside the company and really started looking at the numbers, really looking at the metrics and sort of the trends, and was like, oh, okay, this is in much worse shape than I thought. Now, I don't think I was going to get access to that before I joined. So,
Mhm.
in retrospect, I should have asked more questions that I was kind of alluding to before, done more sleuthing with, I was so focused on like my two key partners, the CTO and the CEO, and probably the head of sales, that I needed to spend more time elsewhere. But when it comes to things like business models, just asking, I hadn't stopped because I hadn't really learned the lesson at that point in time, how critical, how much that can be sand in the gears of a business.
Mhm.
And you can step back and you can look at how a company makes money as you're researching the space and thinking about it, and maybe even talking to customers and things. But you can do a pretty good job oftentimes of guessing what the incentive structures are being, or what's happening here with the way this company is making money.
Mhm.
What behaviors is this triggering as a reaction to how in the customers in terms of how they spend money? And is that probably okay, or is that going to be a problem? So I think just actually taking a step back and drawing out the revenue model and thinking about sort of the incentives and probably behaviors that are getting exacerbated versus throttled, just doing that little system diagram on your own after you've done your research and learned about a company you're thinking about joining, that's a good exercise to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's instructive. Yeah, I think, bringing an independent perspective and obviously, using the collaboration that's going to be required to put together that sort of model as a way to get to know your stakeholders and engage them in some of these conversations, that definitely resonates. I did
Yeah, and
want
that could lead to
to.
interesting additional questions, where you go to, the head of sales or head of customer success and say, is this happening? Right? Do you see this happen? And they might go, no, that actually, and you're like, okay, I was worried about nothing. Or maybe they go, actually, that is a bit of an issue for us. And here's all the features we want you to make to solve it for us.
Right. Naturally.
Because it's all going to be solved through features, right?
It always is. It always is. Yeah. Um, no, that's good stuff. I wanted to circle back to customers because I think, we've centered some other stakeholder groups in this conversation, and I think rightfully so. But obviously, one of the first pieces of advice, no matter at what level you're starting as a PM, is to go talk to the customers, right, and hear their perspective. I think in some of these kinds of scenarios, you run into interesting challenges in those customer conversations, right? We talked about a couple of examples where you've got marketplaces with different customer sets whose needs may be competing in different cases, right? Obviously, that's not the design of a good marketplace, but when you're coming into a broken situation, that can be the case. You can also have needs of the business that conflict with the needs of the customers, or at least how the customer would perceive them. So I'm curious, how do you approach customer conversations in that context? Do you play dumb and essentially collect the feedback as is? Do you try to use the conversation to tease out some information around maybe like a level of tolerance for certain delays on different things in favor of tackling tech debt or what have you? Just kind of curious how you come in and typically approach the customer aspect of your relationship building in those scenarios.
It's no different, really, depending on the kind of problem I'm trying to solve. I do believe greatly in customer discovery, customer research. I wrote a book talking to humans on this. It's now used around the world in product and entrepreneurship program. Basically every university around the world seems to be using this book now, which is kind of cool. But it's, the classic stuff that you've all, first of all, you have to do it. People say they're going to do customer research and they don't. They get busy, it's uncomfortable, they hide from it. So one, you have to make yourself do it, and not foist it onto a research team or other people. You got to do the first person listening yourself. And then it's about, like, what am I trying to learn? What are the key questions I need to ask? And getting people to tell you specifics, not vague things, but like, talk me through the last time you did something. Talk me through what's really going on. You could ask questions of like, does this happen? Like, and they go, yeah, it does. And like, okay, now, okay. And then you go, let's go through the story. When was the last time that happened? Now let's get specific. You get people out of the vague, the abstract. It's when you're in the abstract that people tell you what they think they should have done or what you want to hear, as opposed to what really down. But that same approach of just asking probing questions and going in saying, there's a few things I'm curious about that I think are really important. Let me start with like 5 or 6 questions that I know I'm going to ask, and I'm probably going to ask 100 follow-on questions. It's all about like dig deeper, dig deeper. It's just the whole 5 whys thing, right? It's just dig deeper, dig deeper, dig deeper, listen, probe, and get them specific. Brings you unbelievable amounts of insights a lot of the time. Sometimes you have a fish that doesn't give you anything, you got to throw them back in the sea. But if someone's just a rock, you can't get anything out of the rock. There's no lemonade in this rock. But that approach, I think, is for any problem that you're trying to understand, where you've got to get to the customer and or the prospect and really like understand their behaviors and their motivations and things like that. That's why we talk to them. That's why we listen to them. And the technique works for any kind of problem.
Awesome.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? You have a different perspective, Dan?
No, I think I tend to agree. I mean, I think in my experience talking to clients, you're building a relationship that's built to last, right? This is somebody hopefully that you're going to be engaging in an ongoing capacity, like you said, and you're not going to have time to ask 100 questions on one call. You're going to have follow-up meetings. You're going to be engaging them on different topics going forward. And so, you're not trying to come in and assert any panic or obviously, or, try to tip the hand that things might be unstable. You might, come in with different priorities to discuss with them in different cases, depending on what you need, but also you have to make space to hear their needs above all else and use those to inform yours. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate for a different approach. And the approach I would advocate for is to just, build a relationship of trust with the client that you can take and leverage. But, I do think, especially when there are situations of particular urgency and, you've got pretty critical needs to address for the core business, you've sometimes got to be tactical in the feedback that you're collecting just to make sure that you're getting the signal you need to move forward.
Well, it's always about prioritizing. Like when I make that crack about 100 questions, maybe it's not 100 questions, but you can ask a lot of questions in an hour, even in 30 minutes. You don't go in with like 20 questions you're trying to get to, because then you're going to rush. You're bouncing around. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying like you go into a conversation, there's probably like less than a handful of things you really want to dig into. So you've got a few starter questions. It's all the follow-on questions. You could ask lots of follow-on questions because people will often give you a one-word answer, or they'll give you, or they say something really short and you say, okay, tell me more. Let's go deeper. Let's walk through the specific case. Like, did you feel this way? Like, it's all these little prompts that are getting like digging and pulling them out. But that begins with a very small, highly prioritized list of things that you're trying to dig into. And they don't need to know. You're listening and you're asking questions. They don't need to know that you think something's screwed up or something's broken or what feature you're thinking about. You're not asking them about that. They don't need to know that. You're saying, let's talk about your experience. Let's talk about your experience and your psychology. You don't say it that way, but that's what you're trying to do. And yeah.
I think that's a good way to center it. We have a quick question from the audience. I know we're a couple minutes past, so I'll address this. Question is, how do we get fireside chats virtually or remotely more accepted by clients all times of day post COVID-19? I'll just say, in terms of the fireside chats that we're hosting here at Products That Count, we're committed to hosting these on a regular cadence. Again, for our New York audience, we're hosting this at 6 p.m. Eastern. We've got our branches or our chapters in other cities around the country. So they host their events at different times of day. Giff, this question may have been also more related to, kind of engaging groups of clients, which I know, advisory boards or panels can be a real asset, especially as you're getting up and running and considering change that might be a little bit more substantial. You build consensus with the client community and give them an opportunity to hear from each other. That can help sort of ease the process of delivering that change. Do you have any advice for the audience on arranging those sorts of panels and maybe considering what types of clients make sense to involve?
I view this more as marketing than as research, honestly. It's tremendous at all levels of an organization, but especially as a startup, to build a group of enthusiasts who love what you're trying to do and feel part of it, feel important, feel included, and will get out there and vouch for you and speak for you and shout how awesome you are to the world. Like, that's often why you're doing those panels, those boards, those kind of thing. If you're talking to the same people over and over again, you're creating an echo chamber for yourself that's problematic. So you may have a few like really wise, really go-to people that you sort of touch upon, but you don't want to limit your research to that. You need a diverse population that you're learning from. So when it comes to research, you want to push yourself to get out of your comfort zone, not go to the same people, get to new voices, learn from them, listen to them, ask them those great questions. So yes, those communities, those panels, that's about building a set of evangelists that you're hugging and you're bringing close, and you can learn from them. They will be your greatest enthusiasts, but you just have to remember that your greatest enthusiasts are not your, there's always a bell curve, right, of customers, right? And it is true that at a startup stage, you got to really focus on that early adopter, because if you don't get them, you won't get the others, but you also can only listen to them because they're not your mainstream customer. And so you're talking to lots of different people, and you try to keep the context of who is this person in mind as you interpret what you're hearing. So that's just some quick thoughts on hopefully I steered into the right direction for you.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I think that's a good place.
And never do focus groups for research. You might have two people on your side, like a note taker and a question asker, but always talk to one person at a time. It's the only way you can do the kind of follow-on questions that you're needed. That's where the insights come from. It's not at the shallow level. And focus groups, lots of people talking, you can never dig deep. That can be useful for let's talk about our brand. Focus groups can work for marketing. They do not work for product. Again, separate from creating a group of enthusiasts and evangelists.
Words of wisdom from somebody who's literally written a book about it. So that's a good opportunity just to highlight some places where folks can find you, Giff. Maybe you can take just a minute here to talk about some of the different content you're putting out through these channels.
Oh yeah, I'm not so much on X anymore. Once Elon took it over, I stopped.
Okay.
And actually, my blog is quiet as well. But where I'm really sharing right now is 3 places. On LinkedIn, I'm now starting to do at least once a week a little product op-ed. I'm trying to keep those fairly short, and I'm going to start actually sharing some longer form conversations with product leaders that I have as well, where we just go really deep. So I'm sharing that on LinkedIn, and I'm sharing that on YouTube. So you can see my YouTube link there. But the other place that I'm really active. So what happened with me a few years ago is things get complicated with my family, and I had to step back from being a chief product officer. And so actually lately, what's been really fun and engaging for me is I'm teaching on Maven. I'm teaching a class. They actually came to me and asked me to teach this class, and I was like, no, okay. So I did it, and now I'm on my 5th cohort, and it's really fun. It's called Financial Fluency for Product Leaders, although it's actually for anyone who's an engineering designer product. Our fields are not fluent enough about corporate finance, and it can be a real glass ceiling to getting ahead. So I'm trying to help people sort of overcome that. So, and actually the next class starts on June 11th, but I'm doing regular cohorts of that. And then I teach a very small invite only. Well, you apply, and then I decide whether to accept you. It can't be more than 10 people. I do this product leadership class, which is a role play that goes for 6 weeks. And the people in the class play the chief product officer, and I play everyone else. I'm the board member getting in their face. I'm the CEO. I'm the nervous person who reports to them that thinks they're about to get fired. And it's really cool because we, instead of talking the abstract, we role play and try to make these as real as possible, and then we give each other feedback. So I'll do another one of those in the fall. So yes, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Maven are the 3 places that I'm really active these days.
Awesome. Well, we'll get this slide updated before it gets shared to include your LinkedIn and Maven links. We did get a question asking whether this conversation could be shared. Please, it was really insightful. Thanks. It will be shared. So we've got the recording here. It'll be sent out in the coming days, along with some links on where you can find Giff, not only on the new content that he is producing, but also what's out there. Books on how to talk and test with humans, and of course the sci-fi content as well. That's awesome.
I did write a fun sci-fi book as well.
Yeah,
Dan, this has been a lot of fun talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Giff. Really appreciate your time, and thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back next month talking about pricing in product, among other topics. So looking forward to seeing you all there. Hope everybody has a great rest of their evening and month of June in the meantime. Thanks all.